I paid for my parents' dream cruise, but they chose my jobless brother over me. What I did next left them humiliated. Growing up, I was never the favorite child. My younger brother, Daniel, could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. If I got an A, they asked why it wasn't an A+. If Daniel got a C, they called him brilliant for trying. I learned to stop expecting fairness. Still, I loved them. I worked hard, put myself through college with 2 part-time jobs, and built a career in marketing. By 30, I was earning more than both my parents combined. They weren't wealthy, but they had always dreamed of traveling. My dad would watch cruise documentaries on TV and say, "One day, we'll be on a ship like that, sailing through blue water." My mom would sigh, saying, "When we have the money." So, last year, I decided to make that dream real. I spent weeks researching the perfect cruise, 14 days through the Mediterranean, with stops in Italy, Greece, and Spain. I booked a suite with a balcony and paid for everything: tickets, excursions, unlimited dining. It wasn't cheap, nearly $18,000, but I didn't care. I wanted to give them something unforgettable. I even kept it a secret for months, waiting for the perfect reveal. On Christmas morning, I handed them an envelope with the tickets. My dad's jaw dropped. My mom gasped and hugged me. "You're coming with us, right?" she asked. I smiled. Of course. It's our trip together. For months, they talked about it constantly. My mom made lists of outfits to pack. My dad practiced phrases in Italian. I took time off work, bought new luggage, and even ordered custom matching t-shirts for the 3 of us with Mediterranean memories printed on them. The morning of departure finally came. I drove to their house at 6 a.m. with my suitcase in the trunk. I was buzzing with excitement. But when I rang the doorbell, something felt off. My mom opened the door, avoiding my eyes. Behind her, Daniel stood with his duffel bag. "Morning," I said, forcing a smile. "Ready for the trip?" My dad came into the hallway, scratching his head. "Listen, there's been a change." I frowned. "What change?" My mom stepped forward, her voice light, almost rehearsed. "Honey, your brother's been under so much stress lately with his job situation. He really needed a break. So, we decided he should take your spot." I stared at her, stunned. My spot? The spot I paid for. Daniel had the nerve to smirk. "Thanks, sis. You're the best." I felt my chest tighten. "You're serious?" I took vacation days. I planned everything. This was for all of us. My mom put a hand on my arm like I was being unreasonable. "Sweetheart, you'll understand one day when you have kids. Family helps the one who needs it most." I swallowed hard. The anger was hot, but behind it was something colder, the realization that they didn't see me as family worth helping. I didn't argue. I simply nodded. "All right, have a great trip." They smiled in relief, as if I'd accepted it. But I wasn't accepting anything. They had no idea that before we even boarded the ship, I still had the power to change everything. I walked back to my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. My mind was spinning. Part of me wanted to scream at them right there on the porch, tell them how selfish and cruel they were. But another part of me, a much calmer part, already had a better idea. You see, when I booked the cruise months ago, I made all the reservations in my name. The suite, the excursions, the all-inclusive perks, everything was tied to my account. Even the check-in process required me to present my ID at the port. At the time, I thought it was just a formality. Now, it was the key to what came next. I drove slowly toward the dock, thinking, if I canceled everything right now, they'd just blame me for ruining their trip and play the victims to anyone who'd listen. No, that wasn't enough. I didn't want a petty revenge. I wanted them to feel the sting of what they'd done, publicly, unmistakably, and without me ever raising my voice. When I arrived at the port, I parked far enough away to watch. The cruise terminal buzzed with energy, luggage carts rattling, couples taking selfies in front of the ship, the salty air carrying laughter. I spotted my parents and Daniel stepping out of a taxi, dragging their bags. My mom was grinning like a child at Christmas. Daniel wore sunglasses and that arrogant, everything's about me swagger. I let them walk ahead, blending into the crowd behind them. When they reached the check-in counter, I watched the cruise staff ask for IDs and booking confirmation. My dad confidently handed over the documents I'd printed for them months ago. The woman behind the desk typed for a moment, then frowned. She checked her screen, then looked up. I'm sorry, but this booking has been updated. The primary guest is not present. I could see my mom's smile fade. What do you mean? The staff member explained that the suite and all perks have been transferred to a different reservation. One still in my name, but now with only a single passenger me. She politely told them that without the primary guest, me, they couldn't board under that reservation. Daniel tried to argue, waving his arms. Look, just let us on. We're family. The woman shook her head. I'm sorry, sir, but the policy is strict. Without the primary guest, this booking is invalid. The crowd around them started to notice the scene. My dad's voice grew tense. My mom looked around like she wanted to disappear. That's when I stepped forward. Oh, hi. Did you guys get here okay? The three of them turned to me, eyes wide. You, Daniel started, his voice low. I smiled sweetly. Oh, I forgot to mention, I made a small change to the booking last night. You know, since I wasn't invited anymore. My mom's face was red. You can't just... I interrupted. Actually, I can. I paid for it. In full. And since you didn't want me on this trip, I decided I'd go without you. And before they could respond, I handed my ID to the check-in clerk, who smiled and said, Welcome aboard. The look on their faces as I walked past security was worth every penny. The moment I stepped onto the ship, it felt like the world shifted. The terminal noise faded into the background, replaced by the soft sound of water against the hull and the faint notes of a steel drum band playing on the deck. The ship was massive, gleaming white, polished railings, the scent of fresh sea air mingling with the smell of tropical fruit from the welcome drinks. A young crew member handed me a chilled glass of champagne. Welcome to the Ocean Majesty, ma'am, he said with a warm smile. I thanked him and took a slow sip, letting the bubbles tickle my tongue. I couldn't help glancing back toward the dock where, even from here, I could see my parents and Daniel still arguing with the check-in staff. My mother was on her phone, pacing in frantic circles. My father kept gesturing toward the ship like that would somehow change the rules. Daniel stood with his hands on his hips, looking like a spoiled child denied candy. For a brief moment, guilt tried to creep in. These were still my parents. But then I remembered my mother's voice that morning. Your little brother needed a break. As if my needs, my time, my money meant nothing. They weren't just taking something I'd given them. They were erasing me from it entirely. No, I wasn't going to feel guilty for this. I made my way to my suite, and the second I opened the door, I knew I'd done the right thing. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a wide sweep of ocean, the sun glinting off the waves. The balcony was big enough for 2 loungers, a table, and even a small hot tub. Inside, there was a king-size bed, fresh flowers on the table, and a bottle of wine chilling in a silver bucket. I set my bags down and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For the first time in years, I was doing something entirely for me. About 30 minutes later, as I was unpacking, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. I didn't answer. A minute later, a text came through. Mom, we can't get on. This is ridiculous. Fix it now. Then another. Mom, this is so selfish of you. After all we've done for you. I stared at the screen and actually laughed. After all they've done for me? The only thing they'd ever done was make me feel like an afterthought. Instead of replying, I slipped my phone into the bedside drawer, grabbed the wine, and poured myself a generous glass. As the ship's horn sounded, signaling departure, I stepped out onto the balcony. Below, on the pier, I could still see them, small figures now, standing there as the gangway was pulled up. My dad shouted something, but the distance swallowed his words. The engines hummed, the water churned, and slowly, the ship began to glide away from the dock. I raised my glass toward them, not in mockery, but as a silent toast to finally breaking free. They had no idea this was just the beginning of their lesson. As the shoreline shrank in the distance, I leaned against the balcony railing and let the salty wind whip through my hair. I didn't feel empty like I thought I might. Instead, there was a strange, almost electric sense of freedom. For years, I'd bent over backward to keep the peace in my family, swallowing my hurt whenever they favored Daniel. But right now, with the waves glittering under the sun and the ship carrying me far from them, I realized I didn't have to keep doing that. Still, I wasn't done. Once I finished my wine, I pulled my phone back out. There were 5 missed calls, 3 voicemails, and a string of text messages. Some were from my mom, some from my dad, and even one from Daniel. His read, "Daniel, hope you're enjoying yourself. Everyone here thinks you're insane." I smirked and opened the ship's Wi-Fi app. Yes, I had decided I was going to treat myself, but part of that indulgence was going to be sending them updates, carefully chosen ones, to make sure they knew exactly what they were missing. I started small. A photo of my balcony view with a caption, "Off to explore Italy tomorrow. Cheers." Within a minute, my mom replied, "Mom, that was our trip. We deserve to be there." I didn't respond. Instead, I sent another photo, this time of me at the ship's fine dining restaurant, with a perfectly plated seafood risotto and a flute of champagne. Then I put my phone on silent. Later that evening, I wandered the ship, discovering rooftop pools, a full spa, and even a small theater where a jazz band played. The air was filled with the mingling scents of perfume, sunscreen, and freshly baked bread from the buffet. Passengers laughed, glasses clinked, and somewhere, a child squealed at the sight of the pool lights flickering like stars. Everywhere I went, I felt a weight lifting. I wasn't the forgotten daughter here. I wasn't a backup plan. I was just me, and it felt incredible. But as I drifted off to sleep that night, listening to the soft hum of the ship, a thought crept into my mind. My parents weren't going to forget this easily. They'd probably try to spin it to the rest of the family, make me out to be the villain. Fine, let them, because by the time I got home, I'd have more than enough to remind them, and everyone else, of what really happened. And I already knew exactly how I'd do it. The next morning, I woke up to golden sunlight pouring through the curtains and the rhythmic sound of the sea. I stretched out in the massive bed, savoring the silence. No passive-aggressive comments, no family drama, just peace. Breakfast was delivered to my suite. Fresh pastries, fruit, smoked salmon, and a pot of rich coffee. As I ate on the balcony, I checked my phone out of curiosity. More messages. "Mom, your aunt says this is cruel. We raised you better. Dad, you're humiliating us. Daniel, guess I'll just enjoy my stay at their house while you're gone." So he'd move into my parents' place for the 2 weeks. Of course, I put my phone down and decided I wouldn't waste a second of this day thinking about them. Not yet. Instead, I went ashore in Naples. The port was alive with color. Laundry lines strung across balconies, scooters weaving through narrow streets, vendors selling fresh mozzarella and ripe tomatoes. I booked a private tour of the Amalfi Coast, winding through cliffside roads with turquoise water stretching endlessly below. I took photos, lots of them, not for social media, but for later. Proof. By late afternoon, I was back on the ship, stretched out in the spa's thermal suite. The warm water enveloped me, the faint scent of eucalyptus in the air. That's when an idea hit me, one that made me grin to myself. Before leaving for this trip, I'd been invited to a small family reunion in 3 months. Normally, I would have dreaded it. Hours of hearing about Daniel's potential and my parents' subtle jabs about my choices. But now, I could already imagine showing up with a perfectly edited video montage of my trip. Me laughing with locals, sipping wine in Santorini, wandering through Venetian canals. All the things they could have experienced but gave away without a second thought. Not out of pettiness, but as a quiet, undeniable reminder. You can't erase me from my own life anymore. That evening, the ship's formal dinner required elegant attire. I wore a deep blue evening dress that matched the sea and sat at a table with a charming retired couple from Canada. They were curious about my solo trip, so I told them a condensed version of the truth. The wife leaned in, eyes wide. "Oh, honey, you handled that brilliantly." Her husband chuckled. "Bet they'll think twice before crossing you again." I smiled, clinking my glass with theirs. That's the plan. I was starting to realize this trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a turning point, and by the time I docked back home, I was going to be a completely different person, one they wouldn't know how to handle. By the 4th day of the cruise, I had settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be real. Mornings were for exploring whichever port we docked at, wandering cobblestone streets in Marseille, tasting gelato in Florence, or watching fishermen mend their nets in a quiet Greek harbor. Afternoons were for lounging on deck, a good book in hand, and the sun warming my skin. Evenings were a swirl of music, laughter, and flavors from every corner of the Mediterranean. But there was still that tiny, wicked part of me that enjoyed knowing my parents and Daniel were stuck at home while I lived out what had been their dream. I wasn't actively tormenting them. Yet. I was saving that for the right moment. That moment came sooner than I thought. While checking my onboard account one evening, I noticed something. The prepaid excursions I had booked for 3 people were still listed. Since my parents and Daniel weren't on the ship, the spots were still mine to use. A little spark of mischief lit up in my mind. The next morning, I approached the excursions desk. "I have 2 extra spots for the wine tasting tour tomorrow," I told the attendant. "Can I transfer them to other passengers?" Her face lit up. "Of course. That's so generous." And so, I ended up giving them to a newlywed couple I'd met by the pool. They were overjoyed. Seeing their excitement, I felt something shift. Not only was I keeping those spots out of my family's hands, but I was making someone else's trip better. That night, I posted a photo on my private social media of me with the couple at dinner, raising glasses of deep red Chianti. The caption was innocent enough. "Met some wonderful new friends today. Sharing the journey makes it even better." It didn't take long for the reaction. "Mom, who are those people? That's our table in the photos." "Dad, this is going too far." "Daniel, hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't reply. Instead, I turned my phone face down, leaned back in my chair, and let the sound of the ship's engines lull me into a state of pure, unbothered calm. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just payback. This was me reclaiming years of being sidelined, of being told my needs were less important. And the best part? They had handed me the opportunity themselves. But the real payoff, the one that would leave a mark, was still waiting for them when I got back home. And I couldn't wait. The days on the ship slipped by in a kind of dreamlike blur. I savored every moment, knowing full well that this escape wasn't just about me relaxing. It was about rewriting the rules of my life and my family. But beneath the surface of sun-drenched beaches and candlelit dinners, I was quietly planning the next phase of my plan. I wasn't just going to let them pretend everything was fine back home. I wanted the truth out there, the full story. You see, my parents were the type to present their side to the world with practiced smiles and half-truths. They'd say I was selfish, ungrateful, even cruel. And many family members, especially those who only saw Daniel occasionally, would believe them. I needed undeniable proof. So, on the 10th day, I sat down with my laptop in the ship's business center and started editing. Hours passed as I pieced together photos, videos, messages, and voice memos. Everything that showed how I planned the trip, the morning confrontation, their refusal to include me, and my solo adventures on the cruise. The video wasn't a rant or an angry outburst. Instead, it was calm, clear, and compelling. My voiceover told the story from my perspective, the sacrifices I'd made, the hurt I felt when they chose Daniel over me, and how I took back control. When it was done, I uploaded it to a private family group chat, the same one where all the extended relatives kept in touch. Within minutes, messages began pouring in. Some shocked, some angry at my parents for how they'd handled things, others thanking me for sharing the truth. I even received a text from my aunt, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, saying, "I had no idea. You have more strength than you know." Back on the ship, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't just floating on the ocean. I was rising above the lies and resentment that had weighed me down. But then, just as the sun set on my final night aboard the ship, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice was low, strained. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep the distance. But another part, the part that still loved him despite everything, said yes. "Okay," I said softly. "Let's talk." That call was the start of something I never expected, a reckoning not just with my parents, but with myself. The conversation with my dad lasted over an hour. At first, he was defensive, repeating the same justifications I'd heard so many times before. Daniel was struggling. They wanted to support him. I didn't understand what it was like to have a broken family member. But as I listened, I realized something surprising. He was tired, not just physically, but emotionally drained. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said quietly. I thought I was doing the right thing. I took a deep breath and told him how their decision had made me feel invisible betrayed, and alone. I shared the loneliness of being the successful child they never seemed to celebrate, the exhaustion of always having to prove myself. There was silence on the line. Then, something I hadn't heard in years, a genuine apology. "I'm sorry," he said, voice thick. "We messed up. You're right. You deserve better." My mom called soon after, her voice shaky but sincere. She said she hadn't realized how much pain they caused me, that she wanted to fix things but didn't know how. And Daniel, well, he was still proud and stubborn, but even he admitted that he had taken advantage of their generosity. For the first time, I felt the walls between us begin to crumble. But forgiveness wasn't instant. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. It would take time and honesty. After hanging up, I sat on the balcony, staring at the endless horizon. This trip had given me so much more than I expected. It gave me a voice. It gave me courage. And it gave me hope. But it also gave me a choice to return to the same family dynamic or to set new boundaries and insist on respect. I chose the latter. Back home, the reunion was set for a sunny Saturday afternoon at my parents' house. Invitations had gone out weeks before. Cousins, aunts, uncles, even old family friends I hadn't seen in years. I was nervous. This gathering could go either way, a fresh start or showdown. I arrived early, dressed casually but thoughtfully, carrying a laptop and a small projector I'd borrowed. Inside, the house smelled like my mother's cooking, roasted chicken, garlic, fresh herbs. Familiar and comforting, yet different somehow. As guests trickled in, hugs were exchanged, and small talk buzzed around the rooms. Most were surprised to see me, since the family had already heard the one-sided version of the cruise story. Some eyes darted suspiciously, others warmly. When my parents arrived, the tension was palpable. My mom's smile was tight, my dad's jaw clenched. Daniel hovered nearby, glancing at me like a cat watching a mouse. I waited for a lull in conversation, then stood up and cleared my throat. "I want to show you all something." I set up the projector in the living room and connected my laptop. As the first images flickered to life on the wall, a hush fell over the room. The video began with pictures of me planning the trip, the envelope with the tickets, messages showing my excitement. Then came the confrontation, snippets of texts, voice memos, and photos from the ship. There was no shouting or accusations, just the truth laid bare. Faces around me changed, shock, disbelief, some with tears. My parents looked away, avoiding eye contact. Daniel's lips tightened. When the video ended, I didn't say a word. Instead, I looked at each person in the room, letting the silence speak. Finally, my aunt, a kindly woman with silver hair, stood up and whispered, "Thank you for showing us the real story." One by one, others nodded. Some came forward to offer hugs. My parents remained seated, quiet but no longer defiant. In that moment, I realized something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about healing. But the hardest part was yet to come. The days following the reunion were a whirlwind. Conversations I had avoided for years suddenly became necessary. Painful but honest talks with my parents and Daniel. My dad admitted he had let favoritism cloud his judgment for far too long. "I was so focused on protecting Daniel that I forgot to see you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. My mom confessed to feeling overwhelmed by their son's failures and somehow convinced that bending over backward for him was the right thing to do, even if it hurt me. Daniel, who once acted untouchable, finally broke down and apologized for his selfishness and for taking advantage of our parents' love. Despite all this, I didn't want to jump back into old patterns. I told them clearly that I loved them, but that respect and honesty were non-negotiable from now on, that I wouldn't be sidelined or ignored anymore. To my surprise, they accepted it. Slowly but surely, we started rebuilding. The most unexpected healing came from Daniel, who started looking for a job and taking responsibility for his own life. My parents began attending family therapy sessions with me, something none of us thought possible. And me? I realized I didn't have to be the perfect child to earn love or respect. But there was still one lingering shadow, something that even time couldn't erase. The knowledge that sometimes the people you expect to have your back might just be the ones who push you away. And that sometimes You have to fight for yourself before anyone else will. Several months passed, and life began to settle into a new, healthier rhythm. The distance that once stretched between us had shrunk, replaced by cautious conversations and tentative smiles. I was still wary, but hopeful. One evening, I received a call from Daniel. His voice was quieter than usual. "Hey, I just wanted to say thank you." I blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" "For finally standing up for yourself. I realized I was taking you for granted. I'm trying to be better, for all of us." It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Encouraged, I invited my parents and Daniel to join me for a small celebration. Not a grand event, just dinner at my place. The night was warm, the city lights sparkling through the windows as we shared food, laughter, and stories. For the first time in a long while, it felt like family. But as the evening wound down, my phone buzzed with a notification, a new message from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. It was a video, a shaky recording from months earlier. Daniel caught on camera sneaking into my apartment while I was away. He was rifling through my drawers, looking for something I never told anyone about. My heart raced. What is he looking for? Why? The message attached read, "Not everyone deserves a second chance. Watch carefully." The room suddenly felt colder. The fragile peace I'd built was about to be tested again. I stared at the video on my phone, heart pounding. The grainy footage showed Daniel slipping into my apartment late at night, glancing nervously over his shoulder before opening a locked drawer. I knew exactly what was inside that drawer, the stack of letters I'd saved for years, letters from an old friend who had been my anchor during the worst times. I had never told my family about those letters. They were my secret, a reminder that even when my family faltered, someone outside loved me unconditionally. Why would Daniel want those? I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. Had he been trying to sabotage me all along? Or was there something worse? I debated what to do. Confront him? Show the video to my parents? Or keep it to myself? A silent warning that the trust I'd tried to rebuild was fragile, maybe broken beyond repair. I chose confrontation. The next day, I called Daniel. "We need to talk." He sounded nervous, but agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. When he arrived, his usual arrogance was replaced by something raw, guilt, maybe fear. "I'm sorry," he blurted out before I could say anything. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was desperate." "Desperate for what?" I asked, voice steady but cold. "Money. I lost my job again, and I didn't know where else to turn. I thought, maybe you could help. But I didn't know how to ask." The confession hit me hard. This wasn't just about theft or betrayal. It was a cry for help. I sat back, tried to process it all. I realized then that the road to healing wasn't just about setting boundaries. It was about understanding pain, even when it hurt. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, was harder than I'd ever imagined. That afternoon at the cafe, Daniel and I talked for hours, not as siblings divided by resentment, but as two flawed people trying to find their way. He told me about the pressure he'd been under, the shame of failure, and how watching me succeed only deepened his sense of inadequacy. I listened, sometimes angry, sometimes empathetic, but always honest. We made a fragile pact. He would seek help, start looking for steady work, and respect my boundaries. I would support him where I could, but I wouldn't sacrifice my own well-being anymore. When I told my parents about the meeting, they were cautiously hopeful. This was new territory for all of us. The difficult work of rebuilding trust, not on old patterns, but on truth and accountability. Life wasn't magically perfect after that. There were setbacks, heated arguments, moments when it seemed like the past would swallow us whole again. But there were also moments of unexpected grace, a shared laugh, a small kindness, an apology accepted. I learned that family wasn't always about flawless love. Sometimes it was about choosing to stay, to forgive, and to fight for connection even when it felt impossible. Most importantly, I learned to stand up for myself without losing compassion, a lesson worth every tear and every battle. And though the wounds might never fully heal, the cracks let in light. Light I hadn't known I needed until I fought to find it. A year later, the family gathered again, this time not out of obligation, but choice. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and small victories. My parents had softened, no longer treating Daniel's failures as excuses to diminish me. Daniel, though still imperfect, was trying harder, holding down a job, making plans for his future. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, my mother turned to me and said quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on us." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "We all had to grow," I said. The path had been rocky, full of pain and hard lessons. But it brought us here, a place where love wasn't about perfection, but about resilience and forgiveness. I realized that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't humiliation or payback. It's rising above the hurt, claiming your worth, and choosing to heal. Because at the end of the day, family is messy, complicated, and imperfect, but it's also where the deepest love can grow if you're brave enough to let it. And I was finally ready. The final months brought a quiet peace I had never imagined possible. I no longer carried the weight of being overlooked or unappreciated. Instead, I embraced my own strength, knowing I had fought for my place and won, not by tearing others down, but by standing firm in my truth. One afternoon, as I sat alone on my balcony, the same view where I once toasted their absence, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the anger, the pain, and finally, the fragile healing. My phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "We're proud of you always." I smiled softly and replied, "And I'm proud of us for trying." Life would never be perfect. There would still be challenges, misunderstandings, and hard days. But now, I knew that no matter what, I would never let myself be erased again. Because sometimes, the greatest journeys aren't the ones across oceans or through foreign lands. They're the ones we take inside ourselves. And mine was just beginning.